if you're hiring talent, I always look for, yes, intelligence, high IQ, but ultimately high EQ. But that EQ has to convert into empathy for others, and not in the way that how do you feel, but what drives that person. Maybe I'm not hiring the right person anymore. I don't want somebody that has a PhD in code and object orientation. And yes, they might not be the deep technical person that I need back in the day, but now they're augmented, so it doesn't matter.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Long Game. My guest today is Adam Nagus, who has focused on data and building technology for most of his life. In this conversation, we get into the thick of it, where he manages a 16,000 person team from some of the largest institutions at Pearson and Accenture in his career. And he's also worked hands-on as an individual with startups and fractionally with mid-market companies. We talk about where data plays a role within an organization, and it's not what you think. We also talk about how he was inspired by Steve Jobs to bring some of the product and user experience practices into data, and how you should ultimately have an approach to data that is unlike anything I've ever heard. I learned so much in this episode. I think you will enjoy it. Even if you are not into data, even if you are not a technologist, I think this is a really good episode to understand how to think about business and organizational design, as well as where you can grow in your skills and leadership. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Adam, what is it like managing 16,000 people?
That is an amazing question, because one of the things that I like to talk about is when you say your team size is 16,000 people, you're not really managing 16,000 people. The model that I had in place, I was talking about obviously with being a global director in Accenture, was you have your regional leads, like your APAC, EMEA, North America, and then below that you have country leads, and below that then you have obviously their reports and their direct reports. I would say that managing an organization is probably a better way of saying it, of that many people, instead of saying you're managing that many people. And from jumping into that is because it's quite funny for me, because one of the reasons I actually left big consulting, as in left Accenture, was I found I was being more of focused on operations. I was more of a COO, whereas I was always enjoyed coming up with the product ideas, coming up with the entrepreneurial side of things, working out how it was all going to fit together, what the go-to-market messaging was, working with the actual clients, and just holding an organization that size together meant you were flying around the world and trying to effectively teach old dogs new tricks. So from a BI perspective, going to a lot of business intelligence teams and saying, I don't like the way you do things. I don't like the way reporting is done and requirements gathering. I want you to use this completely new methodology, even though you've been doing it this way for years and years. That takes a lot of time. And while you're just trying to massage people to work a different way, then you don't realize that what you've come up with is starting to get stale as well, because our industry from a data perspective moves so fast. So it was hard work. I wouldn't say I particularly enjoyed the COO style role at the time, but this is, quite a while ago. Now, designing operations, I've done that a few times for different organizations, and I empathize more with the COO. But I wouldn't say I enjoyed managing an organization that size, and probably one of the reasons I'm not managing organizations that size anymore.
So you've managed organizations of really big size, but also like straight off the bat, right out of college, you went straight into building and working on the largest project in Europe. What was the $12 billion budget that you guys had? Talk about
12
that.
billion pounds.
12 billion pounds.
Not a small project, like $12 billion.
Yeah. Lowly dollars.
Yeah, so I was quite lucky. I did computer science with management and astrophysics at the University of Leeds.
Whoa, back up. Astrophysics? How did that sneak in there?
I think it's probably to do with my mum. She's a nuclear physicist. Physics is always like run strong and something I've always interested with. So when I got the chance to also study within the physics department as well, and it was a lot of math, astrophysics anyway,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is quite interesting. So I threw that in to a joint honours program at University of Leeds. And I think it really teaches you about the perspective of everything. So you think you're the most important cog in the machine, especially when you're young and eager, and people keep coming up to you. And in the early days of data analytics, we were inventing the stuff as we go. There was no all these automation. All the big players hadn't got um, their gear ready. You had IBM and Oracle, but you didn't have Microsoft doing proper analytics at the time. Google didn't really exist as an analytics player. There was no cloud. So we were just making up, and you felt very, very important. But then if you think about just where we are in the universe and what we count for, like little speck, even at the planet, it kind of grounds you a bit more, and I don't know, makes you a bit more humble, because it's so easy to get caught up if you're like a smart kid on a massive 12 billion pound program and everybody's looking to you to work out how to migrate sensitive patient data from archaic systems into this new shiny database we've just invented. You feel very proud, you feel very excited, and you just work every hour because you think you're really, really important. And then you go, wait a second, I'm just a cog. And it brings you
Just
back
like,
down to earth.
yeah, you're moving around, bits and bytes of data, and then you have the grand cosmic perspective of you are just a little byte of data at the end of the day yourself.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that I always try and remember is it doesn't matter how good you think you are. It's everybody around you. They put you where you are today. Things like that keep you humble. And for me, being a scientist, thinking about the universe also makes me put things in perspective. And I think that's something I keep with my career through the ups and downs. So if things go wrong, it's also again, well, what's the bigger picture? Is this just a setback? But is it really going to change anybody? What's the real impact of me overall? If I think of my entire life, what's this change going to happen? And it helps you, close that door and open another one if you want to use a cliche. So I don't know. I'm very much interested in space, but I've taken different lessons from astrophysics than maybe other people would have. Gravity is also cool. It keeps your feet on the ground as well.
I've been fascinated with physics my entire life, but I've never actually had any. I took one class um, early on, and it kicked my ass. It's the only class that was hard that I've ever experienced, I think. But it absolutely wrecked me. But I was loving every moment of it. I think physics are so fascinating.
I keep getting asked to talk on panels about quantum computing and the quantum world, and I'm like, oh, I know about this, and I'm just trying to jog my brain back to when it was actually working. So physics is obviously very relevant to a lot of roles, but one of the things on the horizon for us, even in data analytics, is quantum. I don't really want to get into that today, but it's something that I'm keeping an eye on to find out, well, even from a data security perspective, once we've got quantum, our encryption is obsolete. So there's going to be different ways of doing it. And even the advances we have in AI and machine learning, like now at the moment, using GPUs, and the explosion in GPU power is allowing us to do a lot more. When quantum comes along and the combination of quantum and GPU, what we're doing right now, it's not going to matter at all. It's going to be so old school. So keeping an eye just on the whole quantum world from a physics perspective, that helps me understand, what a qubit is and why it's different and what use cases quantum could be used for, and why you'd still need CPU and GPU and binary technology, because quantum can't do all different types of maths effectively faster than the computer infrastructure we have today. But some things it can do much, much faster. I mean, there's no comparison.
And I feel like new technology is often, we can get off the quantum topic in a minute here, but I feel like new technology is often heralded as this panacea that's going to fix everything, and it's the solution, and it's the only way forward. And I think Gen AI has kind of that same attitude of everyone
Gen
saying, "What's our
AI.
AI strategy? It can do everything." And it's like, yeah, it's very revolutionary and it can do things phenomenally different that other technology can't, but it's just another tool in the tool belt. And I think quantum, like you said, it's going to blow away historical ways of encryption and we're going to have to change a lot of things that we do. And yet there's also more traditional historical legacy ways of building things and computing that will still be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, quantum AI, whatever that's going to look like. I mean, nobody really knows. That will
But
be,
if you incorporate a company and just name it quantum AI, you'll probably have $100 million valuation off the bat.
if that's not already done, we should be
Yeah.
doing that now.
So let's go back into the NIH project and kind of just jumping into data, very early stages. I know you've spent and worked with data for most of your career, but you also have this different perspective of the human side of it, of the communication side of it. You also shared with me that you found kind of business intelligence reports and some of the stuff that you're doing stupid or boring. Like talk about your relationship with data from when you started exploring it and building, and then also how it's evolved over time.
Okay, well, so I think I've been described more of as a maverick throughout my career. So when I joined the National Programme for IT back in 2004 with the National Health Service in the UK, that was the £12 billion programme to really create that digital patient record. And my first day on the job was I was locked in pretty much a closet. It was a tiny room and told you have to be in here because you're loading patient data. I went, okay. And they sat me down in front of a machine and I clicked
So that
go and
was
I
like
watched.
security because if you were locked in this room, it was
Oh,
safer
yeah.
or something.
I don't know. People would, I mean, there was no GDPR, there was no data protection rules. They were just making this up. If you put a PIN
Just a
number on a
bunch of
wardrobe,
closets.
in a closet and stick somebody in there, then you're secure. I was like, okay, it doesn't, I'm not going to say how the data came to me. Never just turned up in a taxi or anything. But yes, it was a very different world back then. And I was sitting down watching a status bar, and I thought, I've been to university for 5 years. I have 2 degrees, and I'm sitting there watching a status bar. And it was very slow, and it produced the worst sort of, those log files with just error codes in it. That's
Yeah.
what this piece of software did, this migration. And I went home quite dejected on my first day in big enterprise corporate land. And then one of the things I thought about that evening was, well, why do I have to do what I was told? I kind of thought, well, the end game is how do we get clean data being provided to us from really, really old systems and only put the really new new data, clean data with the new values into the new system? That was the ultimate exam question. And that's when I thought, well, let's have a think about what this program's trying to do. And I realized it was a VB6, Visual Basic 6 program. And I went, ooh, I know how to get to the source code of that. So kind of hacked that apart, found that the SQL, the SQL code was really inefficient. So I rewrote it. And then I found the code that was producing the log files. And instead of just having error codes, I built my own little table that said, if it's this error code, write this English sentence, and changed it to natural language so it's easy to understand. And then took an example of one code that was failing and told them, which page of the reference data they should be looking at for a valid code. Produced that report automatically, and then I just sent that back up to the client. As a little grad, turns out you're not supposed to do that, and you're not supposed to email things directly back to the client. And I got in a little bit of trouble that week. But luckily, the person running the program at the trust emailed and contacted the partner on the NHS program and said, this is brilliant. Why is it taking you so long to actually give us reports we could use? Please do more. So I was pulled out of the graduate scheme, promoted, and asked to go and work out at client side, a place called South Tyne and Wear in the northeast of England. Very windy, very cold, right on the coast. And I went, okay, I jumped in my really, really old car, my banger, found it, and started working out of a porter cabin in the middle of nowhere. And that's when I learned, okay, so you can be a bit naughty. You can be a bit maverick. You can think for yourself. Don't just do what you're told, and try to understand and empathize what the end goal really is. And that's kind of how my career took off and the trajectory I went on. So I focused on digital transformation, data migration, and then later on, after building, companies like Vodafone and doing massive CRM and ERP transformations in the telco space, I started to spend more and more time in analytics and business intelligence. And to your point, I then had another little epiphany and went, wait a second. So our entire BI industry is we turn up to a business person that's in marketing and go, what do you want on your report? And again, at the time, I wouldn't say data literacy was even a phrase people used. They didn't know what reports were. They were I just run a campaign and if it works, it works. They never thought about, well, how do I get ROI from my campaign? So the requirements they always gave us were garbage. And we used to take us 9 months to make a report, especially using, I don't know, mentioning names like business objects. So you'd have to go to your enterprise data warehouse and log a ticket to get a change in the table made in Teradata, and that go take off for a few months. Then you go to the team that built the Informatica jobs or ab initio jobs to move the data around and wait for that to get done. And eventually you change it in your semantic or universe, and then you could actually produce a report. And then you give it to the marketing person, and they go, "Oh, forgot you were around here. What's this? Oh, the report you asked for. I asked for a report. Yeah, 9 months ago. Oh, I don't know what this is, but you told me to go build it and have your requirements." I went, yeah, but things have changed. I don't care about that anymore. So job satisfaction really wasn't there when it took so long to make changes within business intelligence world. And there are a lot of organizations where it still takes months to make changes, and they still just go and ask somebody in the business to tell them what they want. They don't use any empathy to understand what marketing does, come up with suggestions. And you do get business analysts now, and you do get the bridge, and you have things like hub and spoke models where you second data people into the business because people have recognized that you need that. Now we're rolling out data literacy to make sure business people, can think in a data way and they can use data to be informed and make decisions. But it's still a long way to go. That culture really isn't there all over the place. So long story short, I thought this is useless. I'm getting out of it. And that's when, you ever heard of the company Qlik, spelled Qlik? They're the main competitor to Tableau, or they used to be for
Oh
Microsoft.
yeah, I have heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So they had a product called Qlik View, and I saw it and started playing around with it. And then I realized that, I wonder if there's a different way of doing something. So I
And
went
this is
to,
just to frame it. At the time, were there data visualization tools that were it was like a known thing, or was it more of these custom reports that take forever to be able to build?
yeah, no, data viz was a phrase that was coming out at the time. But effectively, that just meant swapping a table out for a bar chart. And that's how
Okay.
we position data viz. I wanted to go further than that. Now, I don't know if you've heard of this guy called Steve Jobs.
I
Um,
think
he
name's
worked
a
for a
little familiar.
little company named after a fruit. I think it's Apple.
Ah,
And
yes, yes.
they had a device that they brought out with a new operating system, and they called it the iPhone. And they kept talking about how this was going to transform everything because it was really intuitive and anybody could use it. And you didn't need training or anything like that. And it was just a simple touch interface. And it was all about the user at the heart. Now I'm listening to this and going, well, we don't do anything like that. And when, well, we've got these visualization tools that are really quick and easy to use. And you can build something called a dashboard with it. And there's drag and drop interfaces, and there's ability to do some coding in the background to make it more sophisticated. But I'm now moving into this design world, but nobody in data really understood what UI UX even stood for. And that's when the light bulb went off for me, which is why are we not bringing designers into data teams? Why are we not using empathy to understand what the user, the person in marketing, the person in finance really thinks about and cares about, and apply that to how we come up with our reports and started to build dashboards? And we called it visual analytics instead of data visualization because it was analytical, It was about visualization, but we had a methodology. It wasn't about swapping a table for a bar chart. It was about thinking about things like drill down and having a summary when you first came in and seeing where the problem is and highlighting that using colors or symbols, and then finding out that you could click on it and drill down to find the root cause of the problem and be able to take an action around it. All of that was visual analytics, not just swapping numbers for pie charts, which people use wrong all the time, but that's a completely different story. So I did
What
that
what
to go
why
on.
do you think, just to kind of drill in on that, why do you think people weren't thinking about the visualization aspect of how you communicate the information, and it was just, okay, we're gonna generate the report and swap out a pie chart? But what was the disconnect of not thinking about the user and the consumer of the data until you had this aha moment and you started driving that adoption?
People like to be, I don't know, in their own little sweet spot. If you're a data person, you work with data. If you're a finance person, you work with accounts and general ledger codes and chart of accounts and do those types of reports. But there was never really a career path that said, if you work over here, you have to learn what that person does over there. And there's going to be examples of that happens. And always felt like the best accountants or were the people that just didn't focus on the numbers. They wanted to understand the business of what you're trying to accomplish so they could give you the best advice. And when we were doing data analytics, I don't think people thought about the action at the time or the output. They just thought, I've got to produce an aggregation from a financial perspective. And this is why data teams usually sat under CFOs. It was way before the CDO existed. And it took a while before people thought, well, maybe data is a horizontal that goes under all business functions and everybody needs data. And that only started coming around in, the noughties,
Hmm.
and later into the 2010s. And now, in 2020 and beyond, it's like, well, you're not data informed organization. You need this cultural change. Now it's the buzz to say it, let alone, but will you actually do it? Well, who knows? So 23 years ago, I think people just were put in their lane and they stayed in their lane. And it's probably still happening today in many industries and many job functions. But now there is more of this cross pollination because of way startups work. Agile came out from a project management perspective, which was all about, setting up a project and then pulling people into a pod so you can go and do something, a project. And that sort of methodology took refinement because the original agile that came from Toyota and the Kanban processes, they were designed for manufacturing on that sort of supply chain. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't really for data teams, but over the years it got refined into what agile or hyper agile is now. And that sort of cultural change allows us to think about, well, people have skill sets, but bringing them together, we have to understand what each other's doing to be able to deliver products. And that's where the chief product officer came in, and product owners and product designers, which is your world. I borrow a lot from the products side of businesses when I'm developing data teams. One of the things I do a lot of when I'm mentoring CDOs is I don't focus on the data side. I focus on, well, how do you productize that? Because one of the biggest mistakes I think our industry did is when universities started renaming their courses data science courses, because data science was the new buzzword. We were getting kids coming out, we were paying them the same amount of money as the original data scientist, which was an old person that has 30 years experience in statistical modeling, understands the industry, and could do pretty much anything in code and R and things like that. And then we've got a 21-year-old kid that says, I'm also a data scientist. And we were paying them 100,000, and guess what? Nothing came out because we didn't
Yeah.
have a chief product officer owning it and saying, you've written code in R and Python. That's great. Our IT teams that build apps is .NET. How do you take that, put a wrap around it, UI, UX it, hand it over, get it into support, and get it integrated into the business processes? Data scientists didn't know that, and you wouldn't expect these kids to know that either. So we had all these kids that were expensive. They were all bored doing prototypes and it never went anywhere. So visual analytics really focused on we're a products organization. We build an app to solve a specific business problem. With Royal Mail in the UK, we built a dashboard that showed so many KPIs around how delivery centers and all the parcels and letters were doing. But what we learned very quickly is there was too much information there. And most of the management just sat there comparing their delivery center to their neighboring delivery center and just playing around with it. So we scrapped that version and we gave them a really simple dashboard that had two metrics on it. How many parcels were late because you got fined if you missed the midday deadline? And how many complaints did you get that day? And you drilled down on just those two metrics and you sorted it out. And then we had role-based logons, so you could only see what your delivery center was doing instead of everybody else's. And that's where, UX came into it, user experience, to get that adoption. So there's all these things about product that we brought into analytics to create these apps, which are more than just dashboards. And that's
I
what
think
visual
that's,
analytics
yeah, I mean, I think
is.
it's a fascinating use case, specifically with the Royal Mail, but all of it, of just kind of showing how it's not just about doing the work, the fundamental modeling or taking the data, being able to understand the data, generate insights from it, and then display that information. But it is that kind of holistic approach to saying, well, what objective, what outcome do we want to see? And then there's this back and forth process of, okay, well, if this is the objective that we want to see, we want to decrease deliveries. Well, let's build a dashboard. Let's show them all this information so that they are empowered to make decisions. Oh, wait, human behavior. I only care about myself and comparing myself to other people. Let's do another iteration. How do we make it more targeted, more focused on that user and understanding what their needs are, but also understanding human behavior, and where do you kind of intersect those two while still having that visualization aspect, that data synthesis aspect, tying it all together. It really is a comprehensive product driven approach, but it's data driven approach
Can
while
I ask
taking
your
in the product
opinion?
parts. Yeah.
Can I ask your opinion? So this is a slightly touchy subject for obvious reasons. If you were going to build an AI focused team or even hire a chief AI officer or direct whatever level it is, who do they sit under? Do they sit
Ah,
under the CDO because you already have a CDO? Do they sit under the CTO? Do they sit under the CPO? Where, in your opinion, would you put a chief AI officer?
it's a great question. And I have a kind of gimmicky answer, which is it depends, because I think AI is too broad of a term. We're talking about
Hmm.
applied AI, and the objective is for operational efficiency, which I think is where the best use case is as of right now. I'd probably put them under the COO, actually. I think it's about looking at workflows, looking at processes across the organization, and saying, can we bring in some level of Gen AI or automation to this and say, instead of it being 100% human driven, now it's 80% AI driven, 20% human driven. Now there's a lot more AI that can happen. So if you're a startup and you're trying to build some custom foundational model, that's very different versus trying to take AI and generating performance improvements versus maybe you're trying to do it completely on the consumer experience side and it's more around product and features and customer support. So I don't know if I have a full answer, but that would be kind of my gut answer. But what would you say?
Something very similar because it depends on the type of AI and the use cases you said. Obviously, I speak at a lot of CDO focused conferences, and the CDO, because they're data and they think AI is data, and I'm a global CDO when I was obviously at Pearson. And so I should be saying, yeah, we want it because without data, there is no AI. Um, but the thing is, when I'm mentoring different CDOs that haven't gone down the path I have and they haven't got the product experience and they haven't necessarily learned the lessons from data science, I think, well, AI is just another name for data science
Hmm.
because if you give your data team responsibility of the board says we need AI, whatever that means, well, either you just install Copilot, which is an IT thing from Microsoft, and you use some productivity tools around it. What's that got to do with data? like internal first party data in your organization. But if you actually want to build AI into your product, whatever product that is, well, yeah, the data team's going to be part of it, but should they own it?
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's the
Mm-hmm.
chief product officer, if you've got
Mm-hmm.
one in your organization, because yes, you might need lots of good data under master data management within data catalogs using Calibra, Elation, um, to sort everything out and understand the lineage and trust it. You've got to have ethics, you've got to have policies around it. And the CDO can get involved in all of that. But again, how do you take that and integrate it into your CRM? Who does that? Or if it's into, from let's use a Pearson example, if you were going to put AI into one of the apps for teaching students how to use math, or coming up with procedural generated exercises, making them slightly harder or easier depending on how the kid's doing, recommending certain things that they could look at depending on the path they're going down, and all that AI machine learning aspect of it. Well, that's integrating into the product, and product owners are the ones that have control of the budget, the prioritization of the backlog, how important is this feature, do we roll it out as a pilot? So they are accountable for making sure that product is a success. So AI for me needs to be sitting under the person's going to be accountable for if it works or not, and what it could break or what it could improve. So unless your CDO and your data teams are quite good at data products, have been trained in that way of thinking. For me, if you already have a product or organization, yes, the data teams have to be a big part of this and help you. But for me, and I know a lot of the CDOs I work with, and a lot of my friends and peers and colleagues, they don't agree with this. For me, it's products, and that's the issue that we didn't fix with data science. So that's how I typically answer it.
And product really is just tying things back to outcomes, because you could have data, you could have good visualizations, but then you're supposed to do something with it. And that should impact either the product that you are selling or the organization design. So internal products and softwares and tools that you're using within your organization. So at the end of the day, it's a tool, right? You shouldn't have an AI strategy. It's a tool in your tool belt that you can deploy against problems that you have. And maybe it's the best tool to solve that problem. Maybe it's not, but it's a tool that can be incorporated in your sold product or in your internal enterprise design for how information flows internally.
I like
Yeah,
how you
great.
put that, because another thing I spend a lot of time on with data leaders is asking the question: do they understand this question, and what will they do about it? How do they change the data team or the data capability from a cost center to a profit center?
Mm,
Now, some people don't even understand the question, and other people that do go, "Ooh, that's interesting." And that's what I try and focus on, to your point. And what we did, as we were quite weird because we're a data capability inside a consultancy. So we're used to delivering data solutions. When I was the delivery MD for FTI Consulting, we would build data platforms for different enterprises. But one of our main customers was FTI. It was an internal. We started building data products to help FTI move forward. And one of the things we built was a platform called Toby, which is still going strong, Transform Organizational Business Intelligence. And yes, it is named after my dog. And
it's
and
better that way than the other way around. If your dog is named after
yes,
the business intelligence tool that you built.
he's immortalized in it. The loading screen is a little black dog with ears that wag and everything. But anyway, it's strategic workforce planning. And what we did is we took a capability that does great work with private equities and large enterprises, and works out what their organization looks like, what's the span of control, how many levels of management, how to optimize that workforce going forward. But it was all Excel based. It was just a report, and we were like, we can help. We can make something look truly amazing. So we designed a platform that sucks in HR data from any system, visualizes it, and this is where I borrowed from physics again. Visualize the entire organization using the planet diagrams, or you could use it from an atom diagram, whereas the CEO is the little circle in the middle, and every orbit is a level of management, and any planet on those orbits is a person. So every planet, every
That's
circle is a
interesting.
person. So you can see conceptually it goes out, and you could visualize an entire organization, even 300,000, 500,000 people. And you could click on the orbit just outside the first planet, and that would be your sea levels typically. And that's the CMO. If you clicked on the CMO, then everybody that reports to the CMO goes yellow. But then we use a bit of AI to look at the job descriptions of other people in the organization. And if we infer that they might be doing marketing or something similar as well, we also highlighted them as yellow. You could see outliers. So you could start to see
That's
duplication
interesting.
where things weren't, where people might have just brought in their own shadow team to do something. And then we started looking at things like the KPIs and what if scenarios. So, what would happen if we took this organization or this team and moved it to a lower cost country? Or what would happen if we removed a layer of management? So, you could do these sort of scenario planning. And it was a game changer. And for FTI, it was new revenue coming in, it was differentiating them across that. And then it's still going really strong. And the investment into Toby is just increasing each year, I believe. Um, and from my perspective, this was a data team thinking about a product, but selling it internally in their organization, to your point. And if you can start doing that, so in any organization, if you start thinking about the business as your customer and not just giving them data, but each dashboard is a product, which means it has a life cycle and continuous improvement. You have to have a release every 2 weeks or month or every quarter to keep improving it and listening and getting that feedback. If you start having that sort of cadence, then I think you're ready to start doing AI. It's not about how much machine learning you
Yeah.
can do. It's about your product experience. Again,
And
this
it's
is
not
just
that,
my opinion.
but it's not that top down of like, we need this tool. Let's figure out how to force this tool into something. It's thinking from that product perspective. And one of my friends worked at Google. He was on the Android team, I think, specifically in product management, former engineer. And he talked about how are you familiar with the concept of a product hierarchy?
Yes.
So everything can ultimately be a product, and a product is just something that has a user. So in the context of Google, even the single button on the search page could have an entire team that is thinking about the user that clicks search, right? Or the search input box. If you think about Facebook, the sign up page, that form could have a team of a product manager and engineers that are constantly testing and bringing in data and doing tests to experiment and how to optimize and improve it. And so when you think from a product perspective of anything that has a user is a product, then there's a goal that that user has, right? There's a personal goal that that user has. There's also a goal for the business that sells that product, whether again internal or external, doesn't matter. It could be the HR form for completing internal surveys, whatever. You have these objectives for these products and these goals, and then everything else rallies around it: user experience, data, um, human behavior, the actual aesthetics of it from a branding perspective. All of this rallies around trying to improve and advance that goal. And so equally, how you're talking about it is identical of saying, well, how can we most effectively drive the outcome that we want with the experience and expertise that we have around data, data modeling, and then the visualization of it? So I think the more that companies,
Mhm.
teams can think in this way, that's how you drive impact. That's how you drive results.
That's what I believe in. And so a lot of the work that I do through my organization, Digimasters, when I'm working with private equity or any sort of enterprise that's looking through acquisition or carve out or integration, is we created a new diligence process called digital diligence. And the difference between normal diligence is most diligence processes focus on the financial um, benefits, whereas we started looking at organizations and how well they were using their actual technology. So, yes, you have CRM. Yes, you have a data team. That's a tick. But now we're going to double click. And what the skills and everything I learned was just because somebody has a piece of technology and a tool doesn't mean it's actually being used within the business process. So we do a diligence working out that the company, let's say it's an acquisition, they've got a modern CRM, yes. They spent 50 million putting it in, and it's been running for 2 years. Their month-end reporting is still in Excel.
Right.
They
Right.
aren't using that. You're going to have to spend at least another 10 million on change management because they bought the tool, they integrated the tool, but they didn't do change management properly. And the
Yeah.
culture in that organization isn't able to adapt and change very quickly to technology.
Or the
And
rollout was poorly done, right? People thought about the build rather than the actual adoption.
exactly. And the main skill set is yes, there's a lot of experience from knowing about tools and knowing about business you have to have. But the secret weapon is what keep talking about is empathy. So you need to keep putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Otherwise, digital transformations fail, data programs fail, these AI programs will all fail because we're just doing technology first. And it's a cliche to say, oh, it has to be business led. But it doesn't mean you just wait for the business to do something. They have their day jobs. They've got other things to do. And some of them will be, if it ain't broke, I've still got targets to hit. I've got
Hmm.
time to do this as well. So you as a technologist or a data person can still make this technology and data led by thinking about the business, by working with them, by understanding what they're doing, and then moving the program forward based on what you think they're going to need. And you keep checking with them, but you don't just sit back and wait and go, well, I've asked for their requirements. They're the experts until I've got it. I don't care if we're paying the system integrator every single day. It's not my fault it's being delayed. So that sort of mentality doesn't work. So if you're hiring talent, I always look for, yes, intelligence, high IQ, but ultimately high EQ. But that EQ has to convert into empathy for others, and not in the way that, how do you feel, but what drives that person? Why does that business function even exist in the first place? And then, does the technology I'm putting in actually help or hinder that? Can we customize it to work with them? Or can they adapt their processes to work with the technology, which is ultimately cheaper for the business? But also, do you sacrifice any USP in that organization by forcing a business team to work the way the technology does? And
It
it's always
it
something in the middle.
yeah, I think it's so well put. I've thought about this before about the need for EQ in business, and obviously it's needed in sales, but also in technology, in understanding human behavior, psychology as well. But I think the word empathy is really good at summing that up. And it's almost ironic because we think of STEM jobs, and particularly perhaps data technology, as being, oh, well, you're just writing code. It's all very analytical. It's very, binary, black and white, and you're not interacting with people. And it's almost the exact opposite, that empathy is more needed in that area because you're trying to understand, to the best of your ability, the person's psychology, their behavior, their needs, their wants, their goals, their desires. And you're trying to then manifest that into building a thing, or finding the right data to tell that story to inform that action. I love the
Yeah.
word empathy.
So we have a massive opportunity right now because of Gen AI. So if Gen AI can allow an okay coder to be a great coder, because ChatGPT um, 4.0 model can work really, really well, give you the code, and you know enough about it to go through and go, well, that's quite efficient. Yeah, that should work. But you might not be the best in the world. That now gives you, as a leader, the ability to hire people with more of that maybe EQ side of things, and not have to
Hmm.
focus on the deep technical because they're augmented by the tool, by Gen AI, by all the extra features that come with GitHub now, and etc. So I, as a leader, will adapt the type of job description and the type of person I look for because, I mean, I'm doing coding again as an exec because it's great. So I was like, I need to know how to do this. Do I go out to my team of engineers? And I went, no, I'll just ask ChatGPT, read the code and went, I think that'll work. And it did. So even obviously, I used to be a coder and I understand that all the aspects of it, but I haven't been hands on for decades. So for me, that again is another light bulb moment like the visual analytics, which is how do we get better at getting adoption and ROI on our data programs, our AI programs and products? Well, maybe I'm not hiring the right person anymore. I don't want somebody that has a PhD in code and object orientation and all of that type of stuff. I want somebody that can understand business and understands what coding is and understands DevOps and operations, and that it has to be handed over in support and just think outside their bubble and have empathy for others. And yes, they might not be the deep technical person that I need back in the day, but now they're augmented. So it doesn't matter. What do you think?
I agree with you fully. I think that we live in a world where there has been a strong emphasis on being a specialist, going very deep in a craft and very deep in a skill set. And you then, if you start out as a software developer and you get, $50 an hour, and then you become a back-end focused software developer, maybe you get $60 an hour, and then you particularly focus on .NET, so you're at 65 because you're more focused there, and then you do .NET enterprise core transformations, and right. So there's kind of this need and thought process of specializing deeper, deeper, and deeper. And I think that is a pathway, right? And there is more value in specialization. However, I think the unique kind of X factor always comes from, well, if you're a software engineer, but you also worked as an astrophysicist and you also have lived on 3 continents and understand pets, like it's kind of the weird unification of multiple things that gives you this truly unique factor where you have that more broad, diverse skill set and more perspective. So to your point, if we can bring in co-pilots, if we can augment and have symbiotic connection with AI to shore up our weaknesses, but then do that cool human thing, which is connecting disparate ideas and thinking about outside the box and creative solutions, this need for deep expertise still will be needed, but I do think that a lot of it can be shored up through AI co-pilots that kind of supplement your skill set for the technical side.
Do you know why this isn't going to work though?
Why?
So I like to do something called crystal balling. Should be obvious
Okay.
from the name.
Mm-hmm.
Why it doesn't work? Again, it's the human element. For large organizations, especially, we've been talking about it because this is what we do. If you go to another large organization, you have to make sure that the existing management layer has already got that psychological brain and behavioral brain to realize that
well-rounded people.
Yeah, they need to already exist somewhere in the organization for them to say, that job description we always use, we need to tear that up and rewrite it. And HR also then need to understand what they're trying to do. Their recruitment agents and talent teams and the way they interview and how they get people through the interview process has to change as well. And that's a lot of change. And most big organizations and even smaller organizations, change management is, it's not a skill that everybody has. So even though that we're talking about things that make hopefully a lot of sense to people listening and watching this, it won't just happen. You'll need, that's why I've moved into this fractional career. I get dropped in as a CTO, a CPO, CDO, and we're there either coaching an existing CDO or somebody that's not quite at the C level, or they're not big enough to have a full-time CTO in there just yet as an SMB size organization. But we're coming and bringing all this outside thought processes, and we're there for a year or 2 or 6 months. We kickstart that going, and hopefully that cultural change will happen, and then they move forward. So there is ways of doing it, but if you just think your organization, because they've installed Copilot and they've got the augmented tools and they have a DevOps process, it won't change because that management layer doesn't think the way we do. So
Yeah.
there has to be a people change and a mentality change as well.
If I look into Elijah's crystal ball, I see what you see, but I would challenge it in the sense that I think in a long enough time horizon, competition wins, right? And so, or the model of competition, of evolution, of survival of the fittest generally wins out. And so my thinking is that while that is true, it's very difficult to get all these people to change their beliefs, their habits, their processes. I think a new organization, so kind of new companies starting today, are going to have and value more diverse backgrounds, more people that focus on problem solving rather than, oh, I need 3 engineers and 1 product manager and 1 designer. It's more of, oh, I need 3 people or 5 people that can think about the problem and then work together to solve the problem. And so my thinking is that just like we've had Google from the 90s and 2000s and Facebook in the 2000s and 2010s and these tech organizations have transformed how we think about software, how we think about products. With product driven development, product driven companies wasn't a thing 20, 30 years ago. I think it's a longer time to shift, but I think the companies starting today are going to think more about this comprehensive and holistic human working to achieve an outcome. And I think that's a better model. So if it's a better model, then they should generate more value and market cap. And then maybe the legacy ones either adapt or they die off. But I do think eventually over 20, 30, 40 years, companies are going to trend in the direction of, hey, this is a space we're trying to achieve this thing. You focus a little bit more over here, but also it's this more amorphous thing rather than rigid roles and responsibilities. And here's the clear cut job description, and you're just in this vertical and you can't touch anything else.
Yeah, I'm a 3 to 5 year strategy guy. But yeah, if it's a 30-year crystal ball, then yes,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope you're right. And I think oh, I mean, everything will change within 30 years. I don't think we can predict what's going to happen in 10 years. So I don't disagree. I mean, the diversity factor is something that, isn't easily talked about because of what DAI means, and it's a very touchy subject to certain people. I've always been a massive champion of diversity, not necessarily D&I, because I think that's more about representation. When one of the stories I have is when we were talking about visual analytics and we rewrote the job descriptions, one of the things that happened was we ended up with an extremely diverse team, which went actually 60% female to 40% male, and then balanced out 50-50. We were not trying to fill any quotas. It just happened. But that's because our job descriptions didn't even have the D word in it. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
mention data. We were visualization, we were UI, UX, we were design, and we wanted the creatives to come and join us
Mm-hmm.
because it was easier to teach them how to use a data visualization tool than try and teach a data person how to actually be creative and come up with good design. So we actually ended up with an extremely diverse, from a skill set, from a way of thinking perspective, and a gender balance. But that was all not part of the plan. It just happened because that's what we needed, because we worked in a new way. So I will always say, if you want diversity, if you don't think it's a good thing, it is. Representation, I'm not sold on it. I think fair versus equity world, and that's a completely different discussion to have. But I'm a big fan of having lots of different ways of different people from different backgrounds thinking different ways to have that EQ, to have that empathy. Yeah, if I have a team of everybody that thinks the same way, we'll build some good products, but they'll all be the same. And
Yeah.
our users aren't the same as us. So they might not like them. And we won't have a USP because our customers are all different as well. So I think that empathy, that EQ, and the definition I've just used for diversity are 3 key things that you should focus on. And the Gen AI aspect and the tools we're getting now are just helping us mitigating those risks of experimenting with that size team.
To close this out, maybe double click on advice. So I definitely love your perspective on diversity and on having that empathy. But for someone else, maybe wanting to follow in your footsteps or thinking about working within data, you shared that you kind of had the Maverick approach, not necessarily recommend all of it, but what advice would you have for someone in this current era, maybe earlier in their career, working with technology, working with AI, working with data? Where should they start? What should they be looking for and do?
I would say that, let's say, mid-career or early career? Because
I'll go with
different.
early.
So if
Established,
you're
but still early.
okay, so if you're somebody that's gone through the tick boxes, you've done a computer science or a data science sort of degree, and you're working with data already. If you want to be successful, obviously it depends what you want to do. So some people are more introverted, they love the tech side, and they're more engineering, and they just want to stay on that career path. And that's I said, okay, this is how you move forward into more of an architecture role and what you need to do that. There are other people that want to learn about management and people skills, and they can move into the more of the product roles. And then there's the leadership side of it. So people have the choice now, certain in bigger organizations, to move across staying technical, moving into products, and moving into management and leadership. And some, like myself, try and do all three at the same time. And there is no way I can say this is what you do because I don't know who I'm speaking to. So when I'm mentoring, it's usually on a more of a one-to-one basis.
Mm-hmm.
So all I would say from a general answer to that question is um, communication is something that you need with all of them. Focus on how to tell a story. Storytelling is an amazing skill, and I didn't realize how rare it really is. So even if you're a really technical engineer, if you can articulate why you've done what you've done and why you've actually designed a solution to work this way and how it's actually going to enable you to have a more efficient DevOps process to help make change faster, to get releases out and keep the customers happy and adapt to those sort of changes and explain it and not just do it, but you can explain it and bring everybody else on the journey with you, you're going to be a great engineer. And the same thing with products. I mean, I don't need to tell you, if you can articulate why you're doing the product, what the user or the customer gets out of it, and tell that story of why this feature should come in now before another one, and tell that story and let people imagine what you're trying to say to them, either through slides, through video, through verbal dialogue and meetings. Brilliant. And then leadership, well, storytelling. If you don't get the budgets in the first place from the board, from your XCOM, from your CFO, well, nothing gets done. So if you want to be a good leader, yes, there's lots of things to think about from leadership, like looking after your team and getting the best out of them and productivity. But there is a talent around storytelling, managing upwards. So the one thing I would focus on is storytelling. Without even knowing who we're talking to, I would say that's a skill that everybody needs to work on.
Phenomenal advice. Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you check out this video right here. And if you really enjoyed it and you listened to the end, take 2 seconds and share the love so someone else might find it by clicking the thumbs up button and subscribing. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. But click that button.